most of human history, people have parented the way their parents and grandparents did, with culture providing the cues. We call this Parenting 1.0.
For various reasons, parents began to question these approaches, and we started turning more and more to so-called experts to learn to parent. This was the beginning of Parenting 2.0. This allowed for some real advances, but also a lot of confusion as we got further and further away from our natural parenting instincts.
Parenting 3.0 is about reclaiming those instincts and integrating them with our current understanding of child development. It brings together the wisdom of the past with the best scientific and psychological research of the present.
Parenting 3.0 isn't a fad or a quick fix. It's a set of principles that allows us to engage with our kids and life from an informed and empowered place.
I'm Jai Flicker.
And I'm Deb Blum.
Welcome to Parenting 3.0.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're here to talk about a way that we understand that we can create the types of relationships that we want with our kids. Not just one that's fun and enjoyable, but one that actually is in support of their growth, in support of self-actualization. So we were planning on recording this yesterday. We actually started to record it. And then we said we ran out of time, which was interesting and sort of
fortuitous.
Yes, it was fortuitous because Jai had asked me if I wanted to talk about this subject, and he had sent me some information, but I hadn't really gotten my own understanding of why this was really important. And so when we started to record, we talked about this coming from this place of like how to build these relationships with our kids, and then we're always sort of, when we sit down to record, we're always asking the question, what will this speak to? What problem or issue that parents are having will this speak to? Right.
And we try to frame it so it seems relevant, because we know the information is going to be so awesome, but it's sort of hard for me especially, to back engineer how to even get into the information. So we were talking about that and kind of thinking about like the idea of having a better relationship with your child.
Yeah.
But
I was not quite sure how it all connected. I wasn't quite sure that I knew exactly how the content was connecting to relationships, and even I just knew there was something missing, like in my understanding of it. That was really, if I'm really just honest, that's what it felt like. I was like trusting you that we were going to get there, but I didn't really know how. I just didn't see all the connections. So then last night I went back and I did some of my own reading, and I explored this not only the book that we're pulling from, but I also just explored some other ideas. And by the time that we came back today to record, I had a whole new perspective on it. And I'll just give you briefly what shifted for me, which is that when I first was understanding how this topic, I was thinking about it from the place of relationships, and that made a lot of sense. But then when I explored it a little bit more, I saw that there was a section that I coincidentally opened up to, because I do that often. I just open a book and then I just read what's on that page. And so I opened up the book that we're going to refer to, which is called On Becoming a Person, and it's by Carl Rogers. I opened up the book to a page, and that page actually just talked about what Carl Rogers, who's a psychotherapist, felt that therapy was really about with his patients. And he was referring to the idea that therapy is largely about removing your masks. So it's this idea of getting from this place where we show up with our roles and our personalities and
our defenses
and all these ways that we defend ourselves from the world, and that we're not truly being our most authentic selves. And that, in his opinion, when he's working with people, if he were to summarize what happens most, is that people spend the time that they're working with him on becoming more of themselves. And so as I thought about that more, and then I started to connect all of this, I thought, wow, that's amazing that basically we spend time in therapy, looking back at our lives and unpacking all of the ways that we have had to defend ourselves and become somebody that that's not even aligned with who we truly are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, based on my own personal experience, having gone through my therapy, there's no way if someone said that I had to summarize what I have done, I would say something very similar. I often say that I've been walking myself home to myself. Yeah. And so I feel like that's really true. So then I thought, oh my God, this feels like it's really the crux of this, which is, do we have the potential as parents to create the type of relationship with our children that enables them to not have to choose between their authenticity and sort of being accepted by us or being accepted in the world, but them to be able to hold on to who they are and to have a space to be able to grow into a continued evolution of that person. So basically a container to allow them to become their best, most expressed selves and who they were sort of meant to be.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think is probably even the best way to describe it.
So maybe our title for this is How to Raise Authentic Kids.
Oh, I like that. Right?
I mean, it's kind of what we're getting at.
Yes. And, Dr. Gabor Mate, I've referred to him before and I won't stop referring to him, but he has videos out there and talks a lot about the idea that in order to get our attachment needs met, we as children will do pretty much anything to get our attachment needs met, which is AKA acceptance.
Yeah.
And so we will even sacrifice ourselves and our authenticity in order to be the type of child that gets the attachment and acceptance and love that we really deeply need.
Yeah.
Because probably if you had to weigh them out, they both might be equally important needs, but one is actually a survival need. The attachment need is actually literally the child will fail to thrive. Authenticity can get worked on later.
Right. You're saying if it's a choice between the two, if one of them has to go, we will prioritize our attachment needs. If we have to put on a persona and act a certain way to make sure that we're getting taken care of and sort of not truly accepted by, but conditionally accepted by our caregivers, we will make that evolutionary choice. Yeah. That makes total sense.
Yeah. But wouldn't it be nice
if you didn't
have to, right? If your children did not have to make that choice. And so I think that's where we're going with this conversation is how do you actually create that type of relationship?
And I want to go even one step further. Yeah. So we want to create that type of relationship that doesn't require kids to sort of try to pretend to be something that they're not in order to gain approval, right? Yep. That's good. That's important. That's a good starting point. And there's a way in which this material, this information, these ideas from Carl Rogers also have to do with, I can't get away from this phrase of self-actualization, which may or may not mean anything to people. But the more I have understood what is meant there, the more meaning and depth and importance that phrase has held for me. And sort of there is this process whereby, of course, kids actually become adults. That's not just a matter of getting older. This is why, as we've talked about before, initiation rites are nearly universal in indigenous cultures. It's because this idea of becoming yourself, of your more mature version of yourself, is not just automatic. It's a process. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today has to do with what the conditions, the psychological conditions that are helpful and supportive of that becoming process. I mean, and that's literally the name of the book. It's called On Becoming a Person. And he's sort of saying that, you know, he's not really looking at it, although he references children and parents and their relationships and teachers with children. He's really doing therapy. He was doing therapy with adults. So he's talking about not becoming an adult, because technically these clients already were adults. But it's like, so what is the process of becoming then? And in that case, the process of becoming is becoming a real person. It's almost like we're walking around not even really fully human, or really not even fully really ourselves or people. And he's like, this is about becoming a person. It's not an automatic thing. So hopefully that will make more sense as we talk about the actual the questions he asks himself. It's interesting how he very intentionally doesn't tell anyone what to do. He just lets us in on his own thinking processes, the questions he's starting to ask. And maybe if I could dive in here. Yeah.
He does do a good job of that, though. I really like that about him, that he's more about inquiring into his own process, not so much just saying what you need to do. And yet, you know, you take away from it some pretty good insights.
Totally.
And just one thing about self-actualization, I think that, for me, I really like that word, and I think it means a lot to me about the idea of I just think of it as just becoming more fully human, but really becoming more fully me. And there is something in there about presence. It's like, so it's not just being more me in the world, like I'm just being more authentically me in the world. It's even about just being more connected to myself, more connected to my feeling states and my emotions and my body sensations and my thoughts, and being able to inquire into my thoughts. So it's not just like, oh, you know, I'm just going to show up and be more authentic and tell you what I think, and I'm just going to be more, you know, it's really something a little deeper than that.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at a different quote here. He says, he's talking about, well, two things. I'm going to save that quote because it depends on having read the first quote first.
Okay, so read the first quote.
But before you go there, I want to add to what you're saying about authenticity here and self-actualization. Authenticity, being authentic, is kind of a popular idea right now. And you and I both agree that it often gets taken in a way that's sort of unhelpful. It gets misunderstood or misinterpreted, like that. It almost gets used as an excuse to just be unbridled, right? Like, say whatever you want, offend whoever you want, hurt other people's feelings. Why? That's just what I really think. That's what I really feel. I'm just unfiltered. I'm just saying whatever the frick comes to mind because I'm authentic. And the idea is like, that's not authenticity. That's not what it really means. There's a authenticity means setting aside a persona, not just being highly expressive, setting aside your personas so that you are more congruent with who you are, what you say, you really think, you really believe. It's your true sense of things, and you feel things more deeply, and you can speak to those things in a conscious way. It doesn't mean just being crazy.
Right. And what you said, I really like that. There's a way that it's truly being in integrity, and I have often visualized it that I have this inner self and this outer self. And for a long time, my outer self didn't match up with my inner self. And so the work that I feel like I do is often the integration or the alignment of those two things, so that sometimes I don't even know what the difference is. And there are times I might still play a role and have to consciously maybe I might not express myself in the same way because I know that it's not the right environment for something. It happens so much more rarely that I'm even having a hard time bringing something up right now, but it does happen to me. And it could even just be the type of, maybe it's at a job interview or something like that, where there's a way that you might, temper yourself. But I think over time, if you're really, really being authentic, it becomes a place where you are you everywhere.
Yes.
You are at home within yourself, no matter where you are.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, an ultimate goal that I'm actually sitting here realizing that I'm closer to that than I used to be, because I used to have more places I could bring up examples of where I played a role still, and I can't really think of many places where I play a role anymore.
Yeah. And I think it's maybe there's a helpful distinction that's like, first of all, when we're stuck in a role, we don't have choice over that. We might even mistake ourselves for that role. Mm-hmm. And so we could get really identified with it, and then we're defending it. And whereas once we see that a role is a role, and we get more centered in our true self, our authentic self, then we can inhabit a role and realize we're inhabiting it and make it a conscious choice.
Right.
And then there's another distinction, which is that, and I think this is what you're talking about now, and I relate to this, that the more comfortable we are within our authentic selves, it doesn't mean that we are always the same exact with everyone in every context. Not at all.
Yeah.
Different aspects of our authentic self come out in different circumstances, and I'm going to share a different side of myself with my daughter and my wife than I am with a stranger or in a professional setting.
Yeah.
Someone who I meet in a professional setting. So we can draw upon different parts of ourselves, and that's totally different than being stuck in a role or putting on a facade, and having but being authentic in those different contexts, even though it will look different, it will still resonate that authenticness will still resonate. It still comes through. It's still available or still present.
Right.
Both for the individual and for the people interacting with that individual.
Totally. It's funny that you say this. I have to say that, and then we can move on to the quote.
Yeah.
But what I realize is, in some ways, I am far more of a contradiction the more authentic I become. So when I was playing a role, that was really easy.
You were consistent.
Because I was consistent. Because I was like, I really was the mom. That was a big role of mine. A role that was sort of an identity, right? Like my personality, my persona. Like there was definitely a way that if someone asked me who I was like, I'm a mother. That was what I am. I'm a mother. And when I was working full time prior to having children, then, I was a director or I was a consultant. Mm-hmm. I had these words, and I was able to really play those roles well. And people knew they could expect certain things from me. But the more authentic I am, the more that I realize, like, sometimes I don't even know who I'm going to be in that moment. I don't even know what's going to come out of me in that moment. And I don't mean that in like a sort of loose cannon way.
How does that feel to you?
Well, I've come to trust myself so that it's not, now I'm just as equally on an adventure with myself as I am with the other person with me. And it's it's actually a really sweet place to be.
Yes.
But I think there might have been times when I didn't trust myself as much, and I was sort of I was learning what it was like. And I think in the beginning, there were times when I showed up more fully and other people were surprised by me. So then I was dancing in the space of like, so me being authentic sometimes might be hard for someone else who was used to me being in that role, and maybe always saying yes to them for something, and then I started to sometimes have a different opinion or something. Yeah. But I think mostly those things, they all sorted themselves out.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a very interesting place to be, where there's just a little bit more, maybe unpredictability, but I think it's more contradiction. It's like, like I can feel one way one minute. I say to my husband often, like, well, just because I wanted that today doesn't mean that I want that tomorrow. Or just because this morning we talked about it, I don't know if I'm going to want that tonight. I have no idea,
Yeah.
So it's like this way that I think it is a little bit more like a flow with life.
Yes.
And not feeling like just because I said that I wanted, I don't know, like that just because I said my favorite ice cream is peanut butter chocolate. Like, I don't know if that's going to be that way forever. It might be or it might not be.
Yeah.
But there's another part, though, too. I just want to say that for me, I really have a strong value around honoring my commitments, too. And so I don't want to give the impression that there's no way you can have any things that are important to you. Like, that's a value
or
of mine.
any sense of reliability.
Right. Like, I feel like, but I'm also much more cautious about what I'll say yes to. And I will play that out into the future and be much more willing to say, like, okay, I have said that and I'm going to do that. And there still are times where I might have to, like, I might come up against a place where I committed to something that I'm no longer aligned with. And then that just requires some really authentic, genuine, and open conversations with another person. So I just think that it's I think authenticity is something that's very interesting and rich with nuance type of a conversation.
Yeah. I guess I'll just maybe before we close this portion of the discussion, I'll just kind of bring it back to, because as we're talking, and like, because this idea of authenticity is sort of kind of problematic. Not the act of being truly genuine and authentic, but the idea of what does it actually mean, and how, all the implications of it. And are we, gonna, suddenly start acting different with people who then don't know how to there's all these implications. I think this is why I always come back to the idea of self-actualization, because there's this image, at least that I have in my mind, of self-actualization as being like, the acorn turning into the oak tree, growing, and it's like inside the acorn in this tiny little acorn is this massive oak tree. And there's a process of growth that is required for that inner self to actualize. And not every acorn gets to turn into a full oak tree. I have an oak tree in my yard, and I was out there with my daughter, and she said, "Look, an acorn." I looked, and there were like 500 little acorns all over this corner of the yard. And I'm not going to get 500 oak trees out of those. I'm not going to get any oak trees because there's already one there. So self-actualization, to me, it's like, the way more and more I sort of think of individuals, especially of kids, as carrying this potential that's unique to them. It's as unique as their fingerprints. And there is an opportunity in life for them to manifest that, to grow into that, and to become that, which they are, is them, and which they are carrying within themselves. And this, what we're about to explore, is all about how to assist that process.
That's good. And I like the acorn to the tree, because it's less about, it's really owning that there is something happening that we don't all understand, and to have faith in that journey, process that's not really something that we even know. Like, I literally can't know who my child is going to grow into.
Yeah.
I can't know it. I can have a good hunch. I can see his potential. I can see so much more than maybe even my child can see in some ways. But it's a mystery.
Yes.
Right? Like the self-actualization and life itself is truly a mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a way in which we have to be humble in the face of that mystery, right? And that we can't have our hearts set on the branches growing in just this particular direction, right? There's an organic nature to nature, to human nature. And so allowing for that process to happen is necessary for that flourishing. Yeah.
That's good.
So, should we turn to the source material?
Let's turn to the source material.
So Carl Rogers was a psychotherapist. He's no longer alive, but he was some of this writing is going back into the 1950s, which you would think, God, it's going to seem so antiquated. Like if we, take a photograph from the 1950s and you see, like these old cars and these are what we would call classic cars now, and like these I just have these very Leave It to Beaver images of aprons and ovens and
and typewriters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it's like that feels like a very different era, and yet this material feels like totally relevant and present moment. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
It's really crazy.
Yeah.
It's very fresh feeling.
Yeah.
In fact, didn't I say that to you? I mean, I had read this book as part of a program I was in, or read parts of this book, but I had forgotten about it. But when you sent me some of the excerpts, I think that's what I said, that like this is the stuff that people are teaching right now, as if all of us are like just figuring it out.
Yeah, because it's like ideas take time to propagate in our culture, right? And so it's sort of like, how many people really understand Einstein's theory of relativity? I don't know.
I don't think I do, so I don't know.
So it's like that's an idea that revolutionized our world, and still is like not even
very misunderstood or not fully understood.
So this is kind of like that. Okay, so I'm gonna dive in here. So he writes. He was in the context, right? Is this 1950s style psychotherapy or psychoanalysis where doctors are where therapists are like holding their clipboards and taking notes and analyzing your what you say, and you're literally lying on the couch, and the goal was to analyze you and then give you prescriptions of like, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, oh, you're thinking this because of what this happened in your childhood. And it wasn't like those insights were necessarily even wrong, but that was just a very specific way of relating, of a sort of doctor-patient relationship.
Yep.
And so Carl Rogers really came along and revolutionized that by questioning some very basic assumptions. And so he writes, "One brief way of describing the change which has taken place in me is to say that in my early professional years, I was asking the question, how can I treat or cure or change this person? Now I would phrase the question in this way: how can I provide a relationship which this person may use for his or her own personal growth?" So for me, when I read those words, it was pretty revolutionary, because it just acknowledged that entering into that there even is the possibility that there are certain types of relationships that other people can use. Like I could form a relationship with a student that they might be able to use for their own personal growth. And I still to this day am just so intrigued by that idea that a person can actually utilize a relationship to make progress. That because it relieves one, it releases one of the burden, in a sense, of having to do anything or to suggest anything or to recommend anything. It's like you relate, other than to relate skillfully. You relate skillfully, and that in and of itself is the support for this self-actualization process.
Yeah.
So it just goes right to the heart of so much of what we've been trying to talk about here.
It does, because it's also, we talk about this. There are a couple things that are on my mind about it. One is this idea of shifting away from behavioral management to relationship. So that's one thing, because if you look at it from the therapeutic construct, it's the idea that like I need to help them to do something. I have to fix something. I have to know the right thing to say, the right question to ask, or the right advice to give. And it's moving away from that model, which equates to a lot of the same things we think as parents. We think we need to have that the smart thing to say, the right thing to say, the right thing to do, or that we are actually going to like do everything we can to change their behavior, because we know exactly what they need to be doing. Well,
yeah, I mean, just in taking in a very mundane example, you could be like, wow, the report card came home and it was all C's. And I hear a lot of parents say, hey, I don't expect straight A's, but I mean, come on, right? And so then I think it's a very natural next step in that thinking to say, well, I got to figure out how to get my kid to get better grades. Mm-hmm. And so there's some very practical things. I mean, we even talked about this recently. I got to help my kid learn how to study better.
Yeah. Are you calling me out?
Not intentionally.
It's okay. I can handle it.
But that's, and it's so these are not crazy things to think. It's just that the mind doesn't tend to go to, and this is why I think Rogers is such an important figure. The mind doesn't, for me at least, doesn't automatically go without some training, without some reprogramming to, my kid got all C's. I wonder how I can tweak my relationship with him or her to really help them grow more fully into their academic abilities. Like I don't think that's a common move. It's mostly like, well, okay, they got to put more time in. I got to limit TV and maybe and phone screen time. And, I got to get, they've been staying out late on the weekends. Got to maybe curtail that for a little while until they get their act together. It's all about structuring their behavior and how they spend their time. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes. One of my questions for you, and I'm grappling with ask now or ask after, but I want to ask now because it's here, is this type of container, this type of relating, is it seems like there are times in parenting where we still do need to, where it makes sense to still be helpful in those ways. Like it's not like there's never a time for guiding our kids because they actually don't know certain things. Like, let's just say as an example, they want to get their driver's license, that it's like they've never had to figure out how to work with the DMV. So there are definitely places. It's not as if we're trying to say you should never ever help a person to learn how to do something, or even give them, advice on like, hey, are you the kind of person who wants me to give you a reminder about that? Or do you want to have a to-do list? Or, there are ways that I think parents, I don't want to give the impression that this is like, you're never ever going to ever be able to interfere in your child's life again or something. But because I want to know from you, like when you imagine this playing out with a person, if you think about Carl Rogers, he's doing it in a probably 1 hour session once a week, but with parenting, it's a 24/7 kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, one person.
So if you think about the example I gave of like a report card, all C's, right? I mean, I think it's fair to say that there are definitely some kids where that's like, they're really performing at their best and getting all C's, and so I don't know if I've seen that exact situation, but I can imagine very easily a family where the parents get it, and they're like proud of that child for achieving that level. Okay. But I think most families, like, that's underperforming, even from the child's perspective. I think there's like, I've met literally one kid in 20 years. One, he got all C's. And I just said, kind of expecting I knew what the answer would be, but still genuinely asking a question. I said, well, so how do you feel about that? He said, I feel great about it. Like, and I really believed him. I was like, okay, well then there's no problem to fix here. Like, so good. So I think, but literally every single other student over the 20 years I've been working as an educator, if they've always wanted to get better than all C's.
I mean, I think where I'm going with it though is this. When I think about how I've been a parent, I feel like I am not a master at creating this type of relationship. I didn't know a lot of this, but I could relate to a lot of it. Sure. And I feel like that's my priority. For as many years as I can remember, it's probably since they were born, I always had an intuitive sense that I wanted to cultivate a relationship with my kids, and that I wanted them to become an oak tree.
Yeah.
And I really did. And I really try to watch for their path and to keep guiding them back to themselves as often as I can. And so I feel like there's a way that I try to do that as a way of being. Within that container, I also feel that I have the freedom to sometimes miss the mark. A lot of times miss the mark. And, they just walk in and sometimes they say something to me and I turn around and give them advice because that's just where I was in that moment. And I'm not that hard on myself about that because I feel like, I think where I was going with my question, it really was more about like that this isn't about that you are going to have to act this way 24/7, but it's more about it's really a way of being in relationship with our children.
Yeah.
And that the things that we're going to go through here aren't like, okay, well, you need to know those 10 steps and do it this way. It's just like, how do you begin to invite more of a relational mindset with our children in all of our interactions, because we're still human beings and we're not going to get it perfectly all the time. And so that's...
I love that. It actually kind of relates to what we were talking about before about authenticity, and that it's not that it gives you more optionality. It expands your optionality of like what to bring out in different contexts. And it's the same thing with this. I think if all we know is some behavioral approach to changing, to attempting to fix a problem, then that's what we're always going to go to. And so I think because we are so heavily imbalanced in that direction as a culture, that the relational move is like a very helpful tonic that balances out that imbalance.
For sure.
But overall, especially once it becomes more integrated, it's an option. It's that you can use and intelligently apply in different situations. And frankly, having that relational context, in my experience, leads to more effective behavioral interventions. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not all one or all the other. It's actually when you bring them together in the same moment, that's when things are going to really land the most.
I'm curious if you have a way of either, if you can think of an example, but if not an example, something that just goes a tiny bit deeper into that, because I really feel that I can feel that. Like I'm like, yeah. But the part about the behavioral and the relational.
I in the past, I might have been like hesitant to be prescriptive with a student because they already have homework and I know that they're being told what to do by lots of different people, and I wouldn't want to pile on to that. So I might be very delicate and say like, well, do you want me to talk about something you could do between now and next week? And then they go, okay, yeah. And then I I don't know, I'm trying to exaggerate it a little bit, but so I might be really kind of overly careful about being prescriptive. Whereas if I have a very well established dynamic and relational arrangement with that student, then I might just say, okay, look, here's what I want you to do between now and next week, this, and this. And that could sound almost like overly prescriptive, but because of the relational nature of the rest of and the context, my sense is that it lands way differently.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I'm talking about.
Right. So therein lies the alpha.
Yeah.
Right. Because
absolutely.
the alpha, it's like the little ducklings or the polar bear, with the bears, the smaller bears, baby bears behind mama, because it's like, well, they're much more willing to be cooperative and follow our lead because there's a relational context.
Yes.
And so right. So that's where I think I was going in my very convoluted way, but that was where I was going, which was to say that it's not as if this is a time where we're saying, no, there's never, if you set a relational container and you try to take this approach, you're just going to always be doing this relational approach with people or with your children. And it's not really that. It's really more that it's sort of I don't know, I keep on wanting to use the word container because it feels like it is. It's like, and it really is so tightly linked to alpha.
Yes. And so I guess the caveat or the anticipated concern here is that this could come off as saying, look, just relate to your kids. Don't ever tell them what to do. Don't ever point them in a direction. Don't ever help them with a practical matter. And that's not what we're saying.
Perfect.
Yeah?
That's exactly.
Okay.
So just took a little while for me
Yeah,
to get there, but here we are.
So, but coming back to Rogers. Yeah.
Yep.
He says, it is possible to explain a person to himself, to prescribe steps which should lead him or her forward, to train them in knowledge about a more satisfying mode of life. But such methods are, in my experience, futile. The most they can accomplish is some temporary change which soon disappears, leaving the individual more than ever convinced of their inadequacy. So, what are you thinking about that?
I'm just thinking it's so true.
The most these can accomplish is some temporary change which soon disappears, leaving the individual more than ever convinced of his or her inadequacy. So you go, come on, you gotta try harder, Yeah. I know you can do better than C's. And they go, okay, I'm gonna try harder. And it produces this temporary change, and then it slides back, and then they go, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And they just feel even worse.
I know. Right. So then it's a big hit at their competence.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really, and
so
their
this is what we're trying to avoid. This is what we're trying to
to
avoid. And he figured this out 65 years ago, maybe longer. And it's just taken time for it to kind of be absorbed and brought to light. Okay. So he says, the failure of any such approach has forced me to recognize that change appears to come about through experience in a relationship. So I'm going to try to state very briefly and informally some of the essential hypotheses regarding what he calls a helping relationship, which have seemed to gain increasing confirmation both from experience and from research. So he's calling it a helping relationship, as you know, because he wants this, not just wants it, he truly believes this applies to people outside the realm of therapy. He talks about parents.
Yeah.
He talks about teachers. He talks about coaches. He talks about counselors in general. So he's calling it a helping relationship. He says, I can state overall this hypothesis in one sentence as follows. If I can provide a certain type of relationship, the other person will discover within him or herself the capacity to use that relationship for growth, and change and personal development will occur. Okay, so this is a restatement of what he said he started asking himself, right?
But an important restatement.
I think so, yeah. So he goes on, he says, and he takes the different parts of this hypothesis separately. He says, for example, what is this certain type of relationship that I would like to provide? Okay, now this sort of ties into what we were talking about earlier. He says, I have found that the more I can be genuine in the relationship, the more helpful it will be. This means that I need to be aware of my own feelings insofar as possible, rather than presenting an outward facade of one attitude while actually holding another one. He says, it is only in this way that the relationship can have reality. And reality seems deeply important as a first condition. So if we are presenting a facade to someone else, then that person is relating to that facade, and there's a falseness to it, and kids, of course, are super sensitive to that, especially I think when it comes to parents. They're so attuned.
Yeah, I remember I almost did a talk one time, and I never did it because I thought it was a little much for people at the time, but I'm just going to use it right now. I said, I think the number one thing that mothers, but I would say parents, I just happened to have been working with mothers at the time, but that people do, that is the most important thing to learn not to do, is self-abandonment. Which is this way that we do that. We put on a facade. We kind of say, well, I'm not going to show up fully. I'm going to sort of keep my needs aside. I'm not going to have preferences. I'm not going to have opinions. I'm not going to bring myself fully to the relationship that I'm in. And then some people might call that people pleasing. Could be, like, some people might say that. And I think with our kids, we sometimes do that. When we think about that we have to put their needs first, we actually might do it in a self-abandoning way. And I found that the more that I brought my whole self to the relationship, obviously paying attention to what's age appropriate, but that when I brought my whole self, like when we were talking about what movie we were going to watch, not just let them pick the movie and then I just had to deal with it. Like, I sometimes would say, actually, give me a couple more. Let's see if we can find one that we all agree to, because I've already watched that a lot of times with you, and I'd love to watch a new one or something. Whereas maybe before I understood this, I would have just let them have their own opinion. Like, this is what we're doing. That's what we're doing, and I'm just going to go along with it because I'm the mom, and so I just do what they want.
It's sort of like there's the two sides of the extreme, where one side would be, oh, whatever you want, and the other side would be like, we're doing this. I don't care what you want.
Right.
And to show up in relationship and be like, well, what do you want? And here's what I want. How are we going to negotiate this as people in relationship is different.
Yeah, it's more of a dance than it is a prescription.
Yeah.
And there's really a watching and an attunement, because there's really, some days I'm really willing to just give them whatever they want because there's some reason for it. Maybe they're not feeling well or something else. And then there are other times when I might suggest something and, invite people to join me. And if they don't want to, it's still happening. Like I might say, I want to really watch this movie. Does anyone want to join me? And maybe nobody wants to, and that's okay too. But there's a way that it is a dance. Yes.
Yes. And I think when we're reading this, I mean, we're going to go through another section that reinforces this. in fact, the part that you found last night sort of speaks to this, I think.
The one about becoming, getting behind the mask?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Could you want to add that to it?
I do.
Great.
We'll see if this feels like it.
Okay, I'll just say one quick thing. And what I'm thinking, and we'll see how it aligns, but he talks at certain points about how some of the structures in place around professional relationships seem to be about keeping in place a certain distance or a certain impersonalness, and it's sort of a playing it safe kind of way of going through life. And he's saying, like, to really be effective, you kind of have to be willing to, like, take the risk of dropping those safe distances and being in there as a real person in the mix.
Yeah.
And I think this quote you're about to read, this excerpt, kind of speaks to that.
Yeah, well, and because, so when you said before, like a child wants to relate, and if they're relating to, say, a persona or a mask or something, it's almost as if there's no one there to relate to. There's a vacancy. And so that's really what we're really wanting, is all of us are looking for connection
to someone,
and doesn't, right? And as we become adults, that changes, right? You know, it might be that I want connection. Like in this moment, we are connecting.
Yeah.
Right. And so if there was no one there to connect it, if I didn't have your authenticity, if I didn't have you to connect to, this would be a very different discussion that we'd be having.
Yeah.
So there's a longing that we all have to be seen, to be felt, to be understood. There's that longing, and it doesn't. And if that is met with some other type of vacancy in some way, which we can't always put our fingers on, but there's some way that person's disconnected from themselves.
Yeah.
That relational connection just can't fully happen.
Yeah. You can feel it. You can feel it when you're distance. Like, what's wrong? And it's like a lot of people talk about, I want more intimacy, right, in my relationship.
Yep.
And this, I think, relates.
Yep. Yeah. And I want to say intimacy for most people. I used to think that intimacy was something that we wanted in our relationship, meaning our romantic relationship, but I have come to understand intimacy in a very different way. And I think we all want intimacy in all of our relationships, in our child-parent relationships, in our friendships. There's a way we just want, and you know, someone said intimacy is like into me, I see, or you see. And that's like the idea is like, I used to say to my husband, like, I want to feel closer. And it would frustrate him to no end because I couldn't articulate what I was looking for. So I was grasping, like, I want you to be more romantic. I really want to go on more dates. I wish we would spend more time together. And I would have all these things. And then over time, I realized none of them really satisfied what was going on. And I realized what I wanted was to know his inner experience, and I wanted him to know my inner experience. I wanted to be known. I was like craving that so deeply. And if we aren't willing to take the risk to drop the mask and to show up vulnerably, we can't have it.
Yeah. Which is a great segue into this.
Yeah. So he has a header called The Process of Becoming. And then the next headline is Getting Behind the Mask. And he talks about the goals that people are trying to achieve in a therapeutic relationship. He says, when people come to me, so when a person comes to me troubled by his or her unique combination of difficulties, I have found it most worthwhile to try to create a relationship with them in which they feel safe and free. Safe. Just wanted to call that out.
Yeah.
Because this is exactly what it was. So it is It is my purpose to understand the way they feel in their own inner world and to accept them as they are, to create an atmosphere of freedom in which they can move in their thinking and feeling and being in any direction they desire. How do they use this freedom? It is my experience that they use it to become...
Okay, so let's pause before you read this next section, because there's sort of two parts to it, right?
Yeah.
The first part is creating this atmosphere of safety and freedom.
Yep.
And the safety allows the person to not feel like they need to be defended. And the freedom allows them to move unconstrained. And so I think it's an interesting question to say, well, okay, I start by not activating their defenses, and then I give them freedom to go in whatever direction they want. Mm-hmm. How do they use that freedom? And this is, I think, it goes to, I think, a subconscious fear that a lot of parents might have, is like, if I give my kid freedom, how are they going to use it? Mm-hmm. Oh, I know how they're going to use it. They're going to do the worst, and that's why I need to keep them so constrained. Yeah. And what, while that can sometimes be true in certain instances, it's easy to find examples of that. So to confirm that bias, but my part of my passion here is to look at human nature as it exists, not one or two examples, or not even 10 examples, because there's lots of anecdotal evidence that can reinforce this fear. But it's like, what are the best minds, the best psychological minds of our time saying about how people use this psychological freedom? Well, here's what he has to say.
Yes. And also, I notice parents, yes, they're worried about maybe what their child might do if they were given freedom, but they're even worried about what their child will say if they give them freedom. And do you see what I'm saying by that? Like, there's a way that, like, if I let them have freedom to speak, they might say things that are against what I believe, or they might say things rudely. Mm-hmm. And my invitation to people is I would actually say yes.
Allow that.
They will, right. And to allow that too, because it's only in moving through those that we can get to another place. We have to have a safe space to be able to be free to say things that our person that we're speaking to can handle that.
Yeah.
And can hold that with the faith that our child will move through to
the image
else.
That comes to mind is that of a pipe that has been blocked up for a long time. And when you open that pipe up, some pretty dirty water might flow out of it at first. And if you just look at that water and you go, oh my God, this is polluted, and you close it back up, you're going to kind of walk away going, whew, good thing we averted that disaster, right?
Exactly.
But obviously, if like this happened recently, they were doing some construction, the water got turned off, and when it turned back on, I turned it on, and this brown silty water came out. Yep. And so what did we do? We didn't turn it off immediately. We ran the water until it flushed itself out. And that's what's going to almost certainly happen.
And there's also just this way when someone is starting with a new thought. So like our child comes home and wants to talk about something, it might start off with all kinds of like blaming the teacher and blaming the friend and all kinds of negativity and anger. And then as we allow that safety and that freedom, they then can come to a place of starting to take some responsibility and starting to see things differently. So there's a real importance in that. And I also want to just say something that I really do believe you can't have freedom unless you first have safety. So the safety it sort of comes first for people. The safety comes first.
I agree.
Because you wouldn't even feel free to be able to speak if you didn't feel safe first.
Yeah.
So
how does this person use this freedom?
How does this person use this freedom? It is my experience that he or she uses it to become more and more themselves. They begin to drop the false fronts or the masks or the roles in which they have faced life. They appear to be trying to discover something more basic, something more truly themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really important.
Yeah, they use the freedom to try to discover something more fundamental within themselves, something more authentic. Yeah. So the first thing he says is we got to show up as us. Like, we have to be genuine. We have to be really, truly us, not hiding behind a facade. He says, as a second condition, I find that the more acceptance and liking I feel towards this individual, the more I will be creating a relationship which he or she can use. By acceptance, I mean a warm regard for them as a person, of unconditional self-worth, of value no matter what their condition, behavior, or feelings. It means a respect and liking for this person as a separate person, a willingness for them to possess their own feelings in their own ways. It means an acceptance of and regard for their attitudes of the moment. This is kind of what we're saying, right?
It is.
No wonder we like this guy. No matter how negative or positive, no matter how much they may contradict other attitudes held in the past, this acceptance of each fluctuating aspect of this other person makes it, for them, a relationship of warmth and safety, and the safety of being liked and prized as a person seems a highly important element in a helping relationship. So Rogers is sort of known for having coined this phrase, unconditional positive regard, which is what I believe he's getting at here. And it's really a sort of, I think, a workaround for just saying unconditional love. And maybe unconditional love is even more relevant in a parent-child relationship, but I think it's a more accepted phrase these days. So maybe he would just have dropped that workaround. I don't know. But
well, one thing I think that gets murky with unconditional love is that some people think, oh, that means that you can treat me any way that you want, and that I, have to just tolerate things. And I think that some people like to poke holes in the idea of, like, is there really such thing as unconditional love? Because if you were treating me poorly, would I continue to stick around? And I'm just giving you the the opposing view, whereas unconditional positive regard does have a little sense of, I think, I can have unconditional positive regard for someone even if I don't know them. I don't love them. I could be at the grocery store and I can have unconditional positive regard for somebody.
That's a great point. Okay, so that's condition number 2. Condition number 3, he says, is basically empathy, a form of empathy. He says, I also find that the relationship is significant to the extent that I feel a continuing desire to understand, a sensitive empathy with each of the client's feelings and communications as they seem to them at the moment. Acceptance does not mean much until it involves understanding. You could kind of say, oh, I accept you fully, without actually even understanding what you're saying you accept. It is only as and this is italicized, as I understand the feelings and thoughts which seem so horrible to you, or so weak, or so sentimental, or so bizarre. This is obviously therapeutic context. It is only as I see them as you see them and accept them and you, that you feel really free to explore all the hidden nooks and frightening crannies of your inner and often buried experience. So this is, I think that's just beautiful. It's like, hey, we sort of avoid these nooks and crannies of our inner experience because we're afraid of them. And it's like, if he's coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to bring this positive warmth and accepting attitude, and I'm going to look at these with you, and we're just going to look at them, and it's like, I'm going to understand where they're coming from, and then the person sort of can build up the courage needed to look at them, him or herself.
Yeah.
And that facilitates growth and change. Now this doesn't necessarily, it might not map exactly one-to-one, but onto children, because they're not going to be carrying as much baggage, hopefully. But still, I mean, kids feel things all the time that then they don't know what to do with, and helping them to like turn towards that and explore it so that they can release it if that's what's needing to happen is useful. And bringing this very open, accepting attitude where we're really seeking to understand them is going to be supportive.
And yes, and one of the pieces that I think is really important is to know that one of the things that our children deal with is a deep sense that they're somehow flawed or something's wrong with them if they have like the impulse to lie, or they have an impulse to hurt someone. And so the more that we have space where a child can talk about that, and then we can also balance that with like, it is actually normal. All human beings have these animalistic instincts, and they under the wrong circumstances or right circumstances, things can come out, and to create a safety for them to not only to express the impulse, but then also to create the safe space of like, yeah, and I've grappled with that too, and here are some of the things that I've experienced or how I've done it. So there's also a sense of normalizing being a human being for our children. Because I think that's one of the reasons why our kids, or why people stop talking to people, is because those parts, those nooks and crannies, they're the parts we're ashamed of. They're the parts of us that we think that if I admitted that I feel this way or think this way, you would stop loving me, right? Yeah. That's why we don't do it. So if you can go into a therapeutic relationship and then reveal those and then be loved still and loved and accepted, the question is, can we as a humanity begin to love and accept each other? We're all walking around with all these things that are probably about the same list of things that we feel ashamed of thinking and doing, or thinking about doing and feeling. If we would all just admit it and unearth our shadows, we could actually be in a place of deep love and reverence for each other.
Yeah. And even at the very
existential.
At the very least, we can say, hey, we can begin to provide some of this for our own children.
Yes. Right.
And it'll be helpful.
Right. And it's not saying, let me just be super clear. I'm not saying, oh, let's just accept that our children feel the impulse to lie. And, oh, yes, like we're telling you that it's okay to lie. No, there's a really big difference between feeling the impulse to do something and doing it.
Well, and also just, again, the behavioral prescription of like, hey, don't lie. They might go, oh, I shouldn't do that. But then if the impulse is not understood, then it will more likely resurface. Whereas if we go, let's explore that and understand it, they go, oh, I was wanting to get something and this is my strategy, and it leads to better outcomes. Yeah. So in this quote later on in the same passage, he says, gradually my experiences forced me to conclude that the individual has within himself or herself the capacity and the tendency, latent if not evident, to move forward toward maturity. It says, in a suitable psychological climate, this tendency is released and becomes actual rather than potential. Yeah. That is a great way to wrap up this part one. Everything turned into two parts. Oh my God, doesn't this need a second part? It does, because that whole other part. We didn't even get to the other part. And it's so good. We didn't get to part two. I know. Okay, everybody, I hope this was enjoyable and enlightening and growth promoting and self-actualizing for as much for you as it was for us. I know, because if nothing else, we love it. We are. I feel more actually myself. Me too. So, wishing you all the best. We will be taking a break to end season 1 and then reconvene for season 2. But maybe after part 2, I don't know. We'll figure it out. We're going to leave some mystery in that. There's a little mystery. But please like, share, and subscribe. It's really helpful. We really appreciate it. And we will resume the journey soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.